So welcome back to episode 3 of the Conservatory Refit. Today is the turn of the skirting board. If that sounds interesting, stick around. First thing we need to think about is the layout. And I know that sounds really silly because surely we're just going to put a skirting board on the side of the wall, just cut it down to size and nail it in. And essentially, yes, we are. But this conservatory slopes, and when I put my level down, it's actually sloping from this point, sloping down to this point. And in fact, I've weighed it up, and this is the lowest area of the conservatory. And that's not unusual when you think about the complexities of building a conservatory. Now, similarly, the window ledges slope as well. So that slope gives us a challenge. If we level the skirting board up, so we put it to the wall, we use the level, we level the top of the skirting board up, and then we scribe into the edge. Yes, the skirting board will actually, in the real world, be level, but in the world of your eye and visualization, it will not be level. And I'll have a wider gap between the top of the skirting board and the windowsill on that end than I will on this end. So I need, when I'm laying up the skirting board, to start to think about my reference point. And again, it's all to do with that visualization, the way that your eye perceives a job. The most level job in the world, in this conservatory, will look wrong. So what I now need to work out is my floor parallel to my window ledge? If it is, I will use the window ledge as the line. And that'll be no harder then than resting the skirting on the floor. I want a bit of a gap, we'll talk about that later, but resting the skirting board on the floor, and then it will line up visually with this, and it will look perfect and look like a good job. So job 1 is my floor parallel to my window ledges. The easiest way to check that is with some sort of measure, and I'm just going to come in with my digital ruler because this is going to be easier, and we'll take some measurements. 0.597 meters, 0.597 meters. So this window ledge is parallel to the floor. 0.595 meters. So what's that? Less than 2 millimeters out, probably 600. So we're in luck. The floor, give or take a millimeter over the overall run, is parallel to the window ledge. So what we're going to do is to use the floor as our reference point. And we now know that the skirting board will look parallel to the top. So the first piece I want to cut is actually this piece here from the architrave we've just put up into this corner. 0.676 at the top and 0.677 at the bottom. So that's okay. So we know that we can make that piece 0.676 long, and that's going to fit into that corner perfectly. So when it comes to the joint in the corner, we have two options. We can either scribe it, and that's where we take the profile of the skirting board and apply it to the other one so it slots together nicely. Or we can mitre it. That's where we find the angle, half the angle, and it comes together. Personally, I prefer the look of the mitre joint. It's a little bit trickier, but I think it's well worthwhile. It just gives me a nicer finish on top of the material, providing we do a good job of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is to put the mitre on a piece of skirting board, then we'll cut this to the final length. So I need to find the angle of that corner. There's a variety of ways that we can find that angle. If you're like me using the Festool tools, you can come along with the angle finder. We can simply push this into the corner, lock it down, and then that's the angle. And then we can use the Capex down the center point here to find the halfway point of that angle, and then everything will fit perfectly. The problem on this particular job is that the skirting board that I'm using is very wide and it exceeds the capacity of the Capex saw. So we need to find a different method. So I'm going to use a digital angle finder. Very simple device. It's got a digital gauge on it, and then that just reads off the angle. So I can use this to find the angle, divide that by 2 and set the Capex up to cut at that angle. Let's take the angle first of all. So my angle is 91.2. 91.2 degrees. Now at the top, the angle is, that's not bad, 91.5. So my average angle, therefore, is going to be round about 91.4. So if I take half of 91.4, we can then set up the capex to cut at that angle. Half of 91.4 is 45.7 degrees. So I can now use my digital gauge to read off that 45.7 degrees, which is there, and I can lock that into place. So I'm just going to roughly set the capex to an angle of 45. So I can now just use the adjusting handle on the side of the capex, line my angle finder up with the saw blade, and then just find that angle, which is going to be exactly there. So I've now got the angle set on the capex for that corner. So that now allows me to go ahead and cut the mitre. As always, I like to visualise the cut, so I know my cut's going to be in that direction, and that just makes sure that I'm lining the capex up correctly. Don't matter where this cut is, as long as it's towards the end of the board. So that's going to look good about there. So we've just cut the angle for this piece here. In a second we'll come in and we'll square it up to the end. But while I've got the angle set, I also want to cut this piece here. So I take the same board and I can now spin the board round. Again, visualize my angle. 6, 7, 4. So we're perfect on the length, but that wall is quite rough behind the skirting board. There's been a bit of a botched repair job at some point in its history. So it's just holding it off the wall ever so slightly. So I'm just going to come in with a sander and just give that a quick sand over behind, because I want that to sit pretty flush to the wall. That's pretty good. Okay, so that's better. Now the final thing is that any corner that's being plastered is not going to be a sharp angle. As the plaster comes in, it scoops out a little bit, you get a slight curvature and you get slight debris inside there. So what you now want to do is to just sand off the back corner of this joint, and that'll just give you a better fit into the corner. And I'm not talking any more than that. Very, very, very shallow profile, and that'll just allow you to get a good fit. And there you go. So once that's clipped against the wall, that's going to be really nice. And now we can come in with the other piece that we cut. See how it looks. And what you end up with, if you take your time, is that really nice mitred profile in the corner. The other thing I want you to realise is that the thickness of the skirting board is about 5 millimeters thinner than the thickness of the architrave, and that gives you, not sure it's shown on the camera, but a step down here, and that gives you a really nice transition between the architrave and the skirting board. If your skirting board is the same thickness as your architrave, then there's no guarantee that these two levels here are going to line up, because you've no control without significant work on the flatness of the plaster. I've already seen on this job that's a little bit suspect, but with that step down it hides that, and once all this is nicely bonded back into the wall, that gives you a really beautiful transition. So that's worthwhile thinking about as you're doing the design. So I can now work out the angle on this wall, and once again there's no guarantee it's going to be a 45 degree angle. Nice if it was, but hey, no chance. Now the problem of course that we have on this one is that my angle finder is too long to go into this gap. So we're now going to come in with a sliding bevel gauge to just take that angle and lock that in nice and tight. And now I can use this to capture that angle. This angle is 91.4 degrees. So we'll lock that down. Before I do anything else, I'm going to check I've not moved anything. That's good. So this angle is 91.4 degrees. 45.7. Sounds familiar? So once again, we're now going to be doing 45.7. And all things being equal, this should be a nice fit into the corner. Perfect. Perfect job. So now we just need to cut this piece into the side here. So there you go, you can see it coming together quite well now. So once all that's secured in, that will tighten up beautifully. So that's pretty much it. We just rinse and repeat now throughout the room. So I'll get the next part done down to this wall, and then we'll just look at this angle. It's no harder than the angles we did over there, but just a different angle. So we'll have a look at that, make sure we're all happy. Yeah, see you in a minute. So we've now got these two pieces in and cut to length. Not fastened in yet, so it's just loosely assembled at the moment. And I'm looking at this corner here. Now the angle of this is 134.2 degrees, and I found that using the angle finder, the digital angle finder you saw before, and half of 134.2 is 67.1 degrees. So the capex has been set up at 67.1 degrees, and I've cut this first angle. So now I'm looking at this piece across here. What I want to do is to measure the distance from that angle there to this angle here. So measuring that angle from the corner to corner is 134.5. So 1345 millimeters. So I'll cut this to length, but obviously we need to make sure that we cut this angle to whatever this position needs to be. So I know I've got that angle already set up 67.1, so I can cut that, but I need to find this angle here. Yeah, 135.2. 135.2 divided by 2 equals 67.6 degrees. So we want a piece of wood that measures 1345 millimeters long at the back joint with a 67.1 degree angle at that end and a 67.6 degree angle at this end. So we'll make that cut first of all, and then we'll come in and we'll make this cut. And I'll make that one because the capex is still set up from when I did the angle there. So we'll cut the 67.1 on this end first of all. So you can see that's the angle to our left hand corner. And turning this over, I want an overall length from this back joint here of 1345 millimeters. I now just visualize my angle, so I want my angle coming in this direction, and that just allows me to double check myself when I line up for the cut. So all this is looking good. And I want to be on this side of the line, so I use the laser to come to that side of my mark, lock everything down, and then make the cut. I left the 36mm hose in the workshop today, so I've got quite a lot of debris collecting up on the saw, so I'm just going to clean that off to get things out of the way. I am definitely a clean as you go guy, not clean at the end sort of guy. Okay, so now we can try this and see if it fits. And of course, it does. Good job. So this is looking pretty good. I'm going to continue exactly the same way round the bay to get the bay done. All the wood is now cut up to this joint here. I'm not doing this wall today because the customer's going to put a new radiator into position, and obviously I need to allow for the pipe work coming through the skirting board for that radiator, and I don't yet know where that's going to go. So I'm not completing this side of the job. However, I do want to go ahead now and fix all this skirting to this side of the room. By fix, I mean nail it into position. I'm not using adhesive here. You could, I guess, use the no nails type stuff, but I don't really like it. I much prefer the long nails that come out of my nail gun to fix this to the wall. So you can probably see here, I put some shims underneath here, and that's very deliberate. I want to leave what I call, I'm not sure what the real name is, but a shadow line underneath the skirting board that you can see here. And there's 3 reasons why I want to do that. So the first reason around the expansion and contraction of the floor. If I have the skirting boards at the sides tight against the floor obviously is doing this all the time as the seasons change. And that puts stress on the base of the skirting board if it's tight to the floor. And exaggerating, the skirting board starts to do this over time. Now that starts to put strain on the joins around here. And over time, that will start to crack. And again, it'll look beautiful when it's first painted, but give it 6 months or 12 months into the job, and you'll start to see hairline cracks appearing where the joins are. And that's because the floor is moving that skirting board a little bit. So by raising this up, you alleviate that problem. The floor can float underneath that, and you'll get a much better finish on your paint over time. Now the second reason is that the floor isn't perfectly flat. It takes on over time the shape of the subsurface, which is concrete. And if you can look at this piece here, hopefully you can see there's a slight gap here at this end. It's tight here, and there's a small gap there. And because you've got a light material to a dark material, your eye can clearly see those gaps. So if you leave it flush to the floor, you also get this wave effect at the base of the skirting board that doesn't look very professional. And you can see on that one there, it looks dead straight, and that's because there's a shadow line there, so your eye hides any variances in the floor. And the more that the floor settles onto your subsurface, and obviously the worse that your subsurface is, the more that will come over time. So again, that stops that problem. And the third reason is as a courtesy to the decorator. Obviously that needs painting at some point, and you don't want to be getting paint onto the new floor, or even down the line you don't want to get paint onto the floor. So that gap allows you to put some sort of protective material, either masking tape or whatever else you want to use, just underneath that. Allows you to paint down to the material and gives you a beautiful paint finish as well. So that's why I tend to do that. Now the shims I use are nothing more than a collection of membership cards and credit cards that have expired over the years, and I just had to keep those on one side and just throw them in a drawer. And now I can come along and I can use those to give me that shadow line. Good job. The other problem we've got is the walls aren't flat, and again there's no fault or criticism, that's just the way these things tend to be. And when you have a complicated shape like this bay here, you'll find that the plaster runs out to the edges, and on this wall it's very, very visible. Where that socket is, that point is high, and then it dips down into those corners. Now that's important for us, because when we come to make our joins here at the side, although we've cut our joinery to length, if we push this hard against the wall, it'll open us a gap. So what I'm going to do is I fix it in the centre first of all, and then I'll use a couple of shims behind this just to make sure that the skirting board is flush at the front here and that gap is nice and tight, and then I will fix it. And then we'll come back in later on with a thin sliver of cork, and that will just hide that top joint, and that's much more preferable than trying to force the skirting board into the shape of the wall. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. So I just put a couple of nails in here, and that's already holding it close to the wall. So I've now nailed this to the hump in the wall. I'm now going to bring in my second piece of skirting board. And because that's now secure nicely over that end, I can now bring this one in and secure this one to that hump in the wall as well that appears here. and then I can just tighten the joint up with a couple of shims, and now I can secure this into position, and that's going to stop it following the profile of the wall and making that joint spring. For similar reasons, I'm not going to secure that end of the skirting board just yet. We'll secure that piece of skirting board when we fit the one on the radiator wall. So hopefully you can now see that's giving that nice shadow line round the base that we were talking about, so it looks nice and clean, and it's giving me a beautifully tight joint here into the bay window, and when that's all corked up and decorated, that will look absolutely stunning. So I now just work around the room in this direction, and the job's a good one. So there we have it, we have the first fit of the skirting boards. That's nice and secure, not going to go anywhere. All the joints are nice and tight. Come up with one problem area here. This part of the wall really is bowing in quite badly. So I'm just going to put some shims down behind this part of the board here, and then we can seal that in, and that will look pretty good. Other than that, job's a good one. So the next job is I'll make the shims for this corner and get those in place. I'll then countersink all the nail heads, and we'll come back in with the cork, and we'll just seal all that, and then we'll just seal the top edges, and this is looking pretty good. So the job's proceeding reasonably well. We're now in the smaller room. I've got the architrave on the doors, and I've fitted all this side of the room with the skirting board, but I've come across an interesting problem that's well worth sharing. On this wall here and on this wall here, the floor actually dips, and not the small waves we were talking about before, reasonably big dips, about 2 millimeters deep. I'm not sure if you can see that here on this wall, but here my skirting board is flush to the floor, but here I've got quite a considerable gap. So the shadow line trick won't work, that's too big, and you'll always see the dip in the floor. And the line of the base of your skirting board will exaggerate that as well, and when you walk in, that will be exactly what you see. So here we need to use a scribing technique to shape the base of the skirting board to the floor. I still want the top to be nice and level, but that floor is the problem that we need to look at. To give you an example of what I mean, this wall here and this skirting board was exactly the same, and before I point it out to you, that will look quite nice and you can see the shadow line. But here on this wall there is a dip, and a considerable dip. So I've already gone ahead and I've scribed and fitted that skirting board, and as you can see, that now looks pretty good. Unless it's pointed out to you, you don't notice that that floor is dipping down. You see the nice shadow line, it's all nice and level. So I thought it's worthwhile showing you that scribing technique on this wall here. There's a few ways you can go about this, but fundamentally what you're trying to do is to identify the lowest part of the thing you want to scribe in. In this case, it's our floor. So this gap here is the lowest part. So I want to be able to take that lowest part and transfer it across the board. Now you can use that with calipers, which is the traditional way, metal calipers, and you set the distance of your calipers and you scribe that line onto here, and then we take out the material. What I found with the calipers, with them being metal, dragging metal across your newly installed floor is not always the best thing, and although it's unlikely, there is a potential there of damaging the floor, and it's on this side of the skirting board, so it will be visible. So I use this technique. I come in with my shims, just my credit cards, membership cards again, and a piece of gaffer tape, sellotaped to the back of one of those cards, and I lay that at the lowest part of the board, sorry, the lowest part of the gap, and I hold my pencil up, and what I'm looking to do is just to add enough of these shims so the pencil is just resting on the base of that skirting board. And in this case, one shim is enough. And then I sellotape my pencil to that board. And now I've actually made myself a scribe that's set at the same distance. If the gap was bigger, I'd simply add more shims and sellotape those in. So I can now come over my pencil, find that area again, and now I can start to just drag this along and it will transfer that mark to my skirting board. Now that means I now understand exactly how much material I need to take off the base of this board to bring this into place, and I know I've not damaged my floor. Now I was quite pleased to see this gap on this board, which I know sounds strange because it's making work for us. And the reason being, I fully expected to have to take some off the base of this board to lower it down. Because I've scribed this board here on this wall, obviously this end here has dropped down and there's around about, what, a 2mm-ish gap here at this end. So dropping this end down here will close that gap, it will drop this a little bit and it will bring it back into square. So this actually, apart from some additional work, has worked into our favour. There's a number of ways you can take off this here. I think most people would come in now with a jigsaw and shape that. I don't particularly like doing that, and there's not a lot of material on this one, so I'm actually just going to sand it out, and we'll take the board outside and I'll show you that technique. So we're going to be using the Festool sander, the ETS 153 EQ to be precise, to do this job. I fitted it with quite a coarse sandpaper. This is 80 grit sandpaper, and that will take this down pretty quickly. And obviously I'm working in a well ventilated environment outside on another beautiful day here in Cheshire in the UK. I've also got this connected up to the CT, so we are going to be using dust extraction. We're not just going to let the dust blow over the garden. That will interfere with the neighbours washing and probably upset everybody, including myself. Now we are sanding this, and that is going to create a lot of dust despite the dust extraction. Not a lot, but enough. So I'm also going to use a breathing aid to make sure I don't get any of this dust in my lungs. And that's not because it's MDF we're working here, it's because it's a very fine dust that sanders create. And if you're ever sanding a lot of any wood really, or any material at all, use this, otherwise it does get into your lungs and it's not a pleasant thing to have. We're going to be taking smooth strokes backwards and forwards along that line that we've just scribed. And what will start to happen is we'll get closer and closer to the line, and each stroke will get subsequently shorter and shorter till we're just working on this end, and that will put that curve into the wood that we need to allow for that variance in the floor. And the reason I like to sand this rather than using a jigsaw is, say, it's not an awful lot to take off, it'll come off quite quickly. And that technique of varying the length of your stroke as you get closer to the line gives you a beautiful curved profile that really does fit into the floor very well. And that will give you a consistent shadow gap, again, because we'll prop this up to give us that shadow gap, and it'll look really nice. Now I wanted to try something on this one. I'm just going to work on this end first. Normally you would scribe both ends and we would allow for that curvature, but I want to take this end down first, then refit it and then scribe that, because I actually want the board to come down slightly on that right hand side, the corner we were working in, to get this thing level again. Obviously if I were to take material off both ends, the board will come down in equal measures and I still wouldn't be level. So we'll work on this end first, we'll refit and have a look and see what we think. Okay, so that's it. Let's go and try it and see what happens. Now hopefully you can see that that is a much nicer fit to the floor. Now I know that when you first scribe something in this way, you do tend to get pretty worried and paranoid about, are you doing the right thing, are you going to take too much off? But if you use that technique of putting the line in with your pencil and then use a tool such as a sander to bring you down to that line, then the answer is no, you don't take too much off. I'm still slightly high here. I'm still probably 1 millimetre higher than I want to be at this end, and this gap here is still a little bit large, so the floor is better, but we're still seeing that break there. So I'm going to take my scribe a little bit further along and repeat the exercise. And there you have it. So that's what we're looking for. Skirting board nicely scribed in. We've lost that dip in the floor. The joint will tighten up nicely once I push the board this way a bit and sort out that far corner. So that's it. I thought that was well worthwhile looking at how you scribe these things in. It is a sort of kind of situation you do find yourselves in an awful lot. Kick myself a little bit. I should have noticed the floor dipped here and done some sort of preparation on the concrete floor. But hey, you know, you don't spot everything and you live and learn, and what's more important is that you have techniques in your arsenal to recover the situation. And if you are fitting on a floor, you will get to the point where you do need to scribe things at some point in your journey, and that's how we do it. I'll raise that end up a little bit with a shim. It'll make this shadow line consistent throughout here, and once again your eye will be happy with what it sees. I've got one more piece to do there by the arch, so I'll get that fitted. I'll get everything fastened into position, everything caulked, all the holes filled for the nails, etc, etc. Then I'm going to clean the room out completely, get all my gear out of the way and give it a thorough good clean down, and then we'll come back together and we'll see what we think of the final job. I'll see you in a minute. There we have it. Job is complete. All the skirting board's in, all the arch is done, all the floor's down. What do you think? Pretty nice job, I think. What I did where I was covering the pipes up on this radiator wall, on that wall, I just took a router and I routed out the back of the skirting board, and that just gave me something to cover up the pipes with, and that's worthwhile doing. So all the pipes are nicely protected, it's all cased in, it looks really good. So I hope you found this useful, bit of a departure from the workshop videos, but you wanted to see some actual jobs on job sites, so that's what we've done. Yeah, it's been a good job. Pleased with this one. Hope you found it useful. See you next time.